The house is still, too still. The kind of silence that wraps itself around your bones, cold and suffocating. In the darkness, there's no sound but the faint creak of floorboards as the woman stands frozen in the doorway. Her hands shake, trembling under the weight of what she holds. A gun. It's cold, it's steel-heavy in her grip, as if it's the only thing keeping her tethered to this moment. The silence deepens, the house breathing in sync with her racing heart. Her eyes, wide with fear, flicker toward the room at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. Inside, four daughters sleep peacefully, their innocent faces bathed in the soft glow of moonlight spilling through the window. They are unaware, unknowing. The quiet rhythm of their breaths fills the air, slow, steady, peaceful. And yet everything is about to change. The woman's mind races, a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and desperation. The world she once knew is slipping away, piece by piece, and there's nothing she can do to stop it. How did it come to this? How did she, this mother, this protector, become the villain in the story of her own family? Her heart pounds in her chest, every beat a frantic cry for help, but there's no one to hear it. Her husband, the man who once promised to protect her, lies sleeping beside her. He doesn't know. He doesn't see her, not the way she sees herself now. Alone. Crushed under the weight of expectations that never seem to stop growing. He doesn't understand how close she is to the edge, teetering on the brink of something she can't undo. She stands there, motionless, the cold steel of the gun against her palms, and for one terrible moment she wonders if it would all just disappear, if she could end the noise in her head, the suffocating weight of her fears. If she could stop this pain, this darkness that has been growing inside of her for so long. In the dim light, her gaze drifts over the room, the children, her children, sleeping so peacefully, so unaware of the storm gathering around them. A soft sigh escapes her lips, caught between a sob and a gasp. Her finger tightens around the trigger. The house seems to hold its breath with her. And then in the crushing silence, the sound of the gunshot breaks through, loud and deafening. The world explodes in an instant. The sound rings in her ears, almost deafening, and she can't move. She's frozen, staring at the empty space where her daughters once were, the weight of what she's just done hanging in the air like a noose. The gun slips from her hand, the metal cold against the floor as it falls from her grasp. The house is silent again, but now it's filled with the cold, suffocating silence of regret. The next morning, chaos. The once quiet house is now a blur of flashing lights and frantic voices. Sirens wail in the distance, echoing down the street as paramedics rush in and out of the house. The smell of antiseptic, of blood, of death fills the air. Police swarm the scene, each one caught in the web of disbelief and horror. How could this have happened? What drove a mother to such a grotesque act? What dark force turned love into destruction? And then, in the midst of the chaos, he's there, her husband, standing in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide in shock. The man who had once promised to protect their family is now standing amidst the ruins, unable to grasp the horror of what has unfolded in his home. He looks around, disoriented, as if trying to make sense of the nightmare before him. But even in the storm of grief and disbelief, something shifts inside of him. He turns to the officers, his voice strained, raw with pain, but when he speaks, it's not what anyone expects to hear. "She's not a monster," he says, almost pleading, his words cutting through the tension in the room. The air freezes. The officers stop in their tracks. His words seem out of place, a bitter contradiction to the carnage before them. The mother, the woman he loved, the woman who had just taken the lives of their daughters, was, what? Not a monster. How could he say that? How could anyone say that about a woman who had done something so unspeakable? The cameras flash, the reporters rush forward, and the world watches as the husband stands, broken, amidst the ruins of his family, still clinging to a version of his wife that no one else can see. It doesn't make sense. Nothing about this makes sense. But he's not backing down. He insists, through tears, through grief, through the agony of losing everything, that she's not a monster. The world is stunned. It's as if the very concept of morality has been turned on its head. How can love survive in the face of such horror? How can someone who has done something so unforgivable still be defended, still be called human? The world demands answers, the questions hanging in the air like a heavy fog. How could he possibly still love her after what she's done? What twisted form of love could justify such a defense? And yet, in his broken voice, there is something else, something unspoken. Is it love? Is it guilt? Or is it something darker, something no one can fully understand? The cameras keep flashing, the reporters keep pressing, but the husband says nothing more. He stands, frozen in the midst of his own heartbreak, a man lost between two versions of the same woman, the one who killed their daughters and the one he still, somehow, loves. The world watches in silence, caught in the tangled web of his words. As the sirens fade into the distance and the media frenzy grows, the question lingers. Can love truly survive when it's faced with something so unspeakable? Can it withstand the weight of betrayal, of destruction, of the deepest, most unfathomable darkness? Or does it twist, bend, and break under the strain, leaving behind only pieces of what once was? And in that silence, in the unanswered questions, the story is left unfinished. The world may never truly understand what happened that night, what drove a mother to do the unthinkable. But one thing is certain. In the end, love, the love between a husband and wife, a father and a mother, can be just as complicated and as tragic as the darkest of crimes. The story isn't over. It has only just begun. The laughter that once filled the house was now just a distant memory, fading into the cracks of the walls. The family, once whole and happy, now moved through their days like ghosts, each person existing in their own private world. The mother, the heart of it all, could feel it, the weight of it all pushing down on her, suffocating her in ways she didn't know how to explain. The world outside may have seemed fine, but inside her heart felt like it was being crushed, one beat at a time. She had once prided herself on being the perfect mother, the perfect wife. She kept everything in place, the house, the kids, the man she had married. But now everything was falling apart. The pressure to maintain that image had taken its toll. The endless demands, family, friends, expectations, felt like chains around her wrists, too tight, too heavy. Her mind, once sharp and clear, began to cloud with doubt and confusion. The love she had for her family, once so pure and overwhelming, was now twisted into something darker, something she could barely recognize. The man who had promised to protect her, to stand by her side no matter what, had grown distant. He no longer saw her the way he once had. His eyes, once filled with warmth and admiration, now seemed cold, distant. The conversations they used to share late into the night had become strained, awkward. What had once been easy, effortless, now felt like a chore. Every word they spoke felt like a reminder of how far apart they had drifted. She could feel the distance growing, a chasm between them that seemed impossible to bridge. Her heart ached as she watched him, lying next to her, his back turned to her in the night. He was there, but he was. It was like she was invisible to him, like the woman he had once loved had ceased to exist in his eyes. She tried to reach out to him, to hold on to the last threads of the bond they had shared, but he pulled away. Slowly, imperceptibly, he had changed. She could feel it, he was no longer hers. The house, once filled with the joyful noise of their children, had become a tomb. Their daughters, once the center of her world, had become symbols of everything she could never be. Perfect, happy, loving. They were everything she had ever hoped to be, but somehow, everything she had failed to become. Their laughter, their innocence, only reminded her of her own failures, her own shortcomings. She could no longer look at them without feeling a sharp pang of jealousy. They were everything she had wanted but had never been able to attain. They were her mirrors, reflecting back her pain, her flaws. She tried to push the thoughts away, to ignore the shame that weighed on her chest, but it was impossible. The voices in her head, sharp, cruel voices, grew louder with each passing day. You're not enough, you'll never be enough, you'll never be what they want you to be. The pressure of it all mounted. It pushed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. And the more she tried to hide it, the more it consumed her. Her mind felt like it was shattering, cracking under the weight of the expectations she could never meet. At night, the house became a prison. The silence between her and her husband was suffocating, a heavy silence that clung to the walls. She would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling around her like a storm. How had they gotten here? How had everything fallen apart so quickly? It felt like one moment they were happy together, a family, and then in the blink of an eye, everything had shattered. And yet through it all, she couldn't let go of the hope. Hope that things would change. Hope that the man she had loved would return to her. Hope that her daughters would continue to see her as the mother who cared for them, the mother who could do no wrong. But the truth was, she felt like she was losing all of it. And the fear, the terrifying fear of losing everything, began to consume her. It gnawed at her, feeding her insecurities, her doubts. She was failing as a wife, as a mother, as a woman. The jealousy festered inside her, poisoning everything it touched. It was no longer just about her husband's distance. It was about everything. Her children, once the source of her greatest joy, were now reminders of everything she couldn't be. She felt inferior to them, as if they were living proof of her inadequacies. They were perfect, everything she was not. And the shame of it, the weight of her perceived failures, crushed her more than she cared to admit. As the days passed, she felt herself sinking deeper into the darkness. There were no more bright days, no more moments of peace. Everything had become a struggle. She couldn't escape the constant pressure, the constant feeling that she was failing. And with every passing moment, she felt more and more trapped. Trapped in a life that didn't fit, trapped in a role she no longer knew how to play. The night approached, and with it, a decision. A decision that had been simmering inside her for days, maybe weeks, maybe longer. She didn't know exactly when it started, when the thought first appeared in her mind, but she knew it was there. A dark, dangerous thought, a thought that had taken root and now consumed her every waking moment. It wasn't just the loneliness. It wasn't just the distance between her and her husband. It was everything, the weight of expectations, the fear of failure, the crushing feeling that she was losing everything she had worked for. It was all too much. And when the night fell, the decision was made. There would be no turning back. The rage, the sadness, the overwhelming fear, it all fused together in one horrible final act. She knew deep down that this was the only way out, but even as she made the choice, something inside of her screamed for her to stop. Something deep within her, the woman she had once been, pleaded for her to turn away. But it was too late. The decision had already been made. And in that moment, as the shadows of the night closed in around her, she knew there was no going back, no redemption, no escape. The story was about to reach its tragic, inevitable conclusion. The silence in the house was deafening. It was the kind of silence that settles deep into your bones, suffocating, stifling. She stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the weight of her actions finally hit her. The room was dark, only the faint moonlight slipping through the curtains, casting shadows that seemed to move and shift like the guilt that enveloped her. Her eyes moved slowly, methodically, over the lifeless bodies of her daughters, their once bright faces now cold and still. Her mind couldn't make sense of what had just happened. She had done this. She had crossed the line that no mother should ever cross. And yet her heart couldn't reconcile with the act she had committed. Was this really her doing? Was it the years of pressure building, the suffocating weight of expectations that had slowly crushed her? Or had it been something darker, something inside her that had finally snapped? Was it the love, twisted and warped, that had turned into madness? The question spun in her mind like a whirlpool, threatening to pull her under, but there was no answer, just an unbearable emptiness. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one sharp as if the very air she breathed was too heavy. She felt dizzy, disconnected from the world around her, as if she were watching everything from a great distance. It wasn't real. None of this was real. How could she have done this? The world she had known, the love she had built, had crumbled away in the span of a single moment. It was too much to bear. The soft, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound that broke the silence. It felt as though time had stopped, the minutes dragging on forever. And still, the questions kept coming, louder now, echoing in her mind. How could she have become this? How could she have lost herself so completely? Her eyes, bloodshot and empty, stared at the bodies of her daughters, their innocence now stolen forever. They were gone, and she had taken them. She had destroyed everything she had ever loved. The distant sound of sirens suddenly pierced the stillness, a harsh reminder that the world was coming for her. She hadn't thought about what would happen next, hadn't considered the consequences of her actions. She had been so consumed by the storm inside her own mind that she hadn't considered how the world would see her, how the people who once knew her would react. All she knew was that it was too late now. She couldn't undo what she had done. When the police arrived, it felt like the walls were closing in on her. The officers moved quickly, their faces a blur of confusion and disbelief as they took in the scene. She was still standing there, motionless, her gaze fixed on the lifeless bodies of her children. There was no sign of remorse in her eyes, only an empty, distant stare. Her body was numb, detached from the reality unfolding around her. She couldn't look away from the faces of her daughters, even though the sight made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. How could a mother, someone who was supposed to protect, to love, to care for, do this? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the officers tried to piece together the fragments of the tragedy. Her mind was a blank, unable to comprehend what had just happened, unable to feel anything except the overwhelming weight of guilt pressing down on her chest. But as she stood there, numb, the world was already passing judgment. They would never understand. They couldn't. How could they? No one could truly know the depths of her pain, the years of struggle, the darkness that had slowly crept into her soul. No one could see the unraveling that had been happening inside of her long before the final, fateful moment. Then came the twist. In the midst of the chaos and the blur of flashing lights and questions, he arrived, her husband, the man who had once been the love of her life, the man who had promised to stand by her through anything, the man who had watched as their family fell apart piece by piece but had never once stepped in to stop it. He stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. And then through his tears, his voice cracked with pain as he spoke words that no one expected to hear. "She's not a monster," he said, his voice raw with emotion. The room fell into stunned silence. The officers, the media, the onlookers, they all froze as if time had stopped. His words echoed through the room, shattering the chaos, and for a moment everything seemed to stand still. How could he say that? How could he defend her after what she had done? How could he still see her as anything but a monster, a murderer, the one who had taken their children from them? The cameras flashed, the microphones captured every word, every pause. The world watched as the husband stood there, torn between the woman he had once loved and the woman who had just destroyed their family. It didn't make sense. How could anyone defend the person responsible for such horror? How could love survive something like this? Was it loyalty? Was it something darker, something deeper that bound him to her in a way that no one could understand? The questions flooded the air, each one more impossible than the last. The reporters pressed in, trying to get an answer, trying to make sense of his words. But he said nothing more. His gaze never left her, his broken heart still clinging to the woman he had once known. The world watched as the man who should have been filled with anger and hatred spoke of love, of devotion, in the face of something no one could comprehend. The truth was there, hidden in the pain, the confusion, the silence. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a story about love, loyalty, and the kind of bond that can never be broken, no matter how far down the road of darkness someone may travel. It wasn't about excusing her actions. It was about understanding the complexity of the human heart, the depth of emotion that could lead to something so incomprehensible. And in that moment, as the world gasped in disbelief, the husband's words became a painful reminder of the tragic truth. Love doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it's just there, unyielding, even when it defies all reason. The story was far from over. It had only just begun. And the world would never truly understand the depth of the bond that tied them together or the darkness that had consumed them both. It was a story of tragedy, of loss, of broken hearts. But it was also a story of love, complicated, messy, and tragic. And in that love lay the deepest question of all. Can love ever truly survive the unspeakable? The world was quick to label her a monster, a killer. The headlines screamed her name, tearing through the fabric of society's understanding of good and evil. But amidst the noise, one voice stood out, her husband's. His words cut through the frenzy like a knife. Not a monster. In the aftermath of unimaginable horror, those words echoed in the minds of everyone who heard them. How could he say that? How could anyone defend her after what she had done? To the world, she was nothing more than a murderer, a woman who had taken the lives of her own children. But to him, she was still something else. The media pounced like hungry vultures, circling, tearing apart every last shred of her humanity. They needed answers, they needed to know why someone would commit such an unspeakable act. But the answer wasn't something they could easily understand, something they could report in a simple soundbite. It wasn't just love. It wasn't just blind loyalty. It was something deeper, something twisted, something only he could comprehend. And that was what made it so difficult for anyone else to grasp. In the days that followed, the court hearings dragged on, a slow, suffocating process. Lawyers argued, witnesses testified, and the world waited for justice. But all anyone could focus on was the husband's defense. The cameras, the microphones, they all captured his words, his painful insistence that she was not a monster. The world watched, horrified, confused. How could he say such a thing? How could a man stand by his wife after she had destroyed their family, after she had committed the most unforgivable act imaginable? The truth was, no one really knew, not even him. The days after the tragedy were a blur, a haze of confusion and pain. The house, once filled with laughter, love, and the hum of daily life, was now a hollow shell. Empty rooms echoed with silence, and the air was thick with grief. The man who had once stood strong, the man who had promised to protect his family, now found himself lost in his own mind. How could he still love her? How could he forgive the woman who had ripped apart everything they had built together? He didn't know. He couldn't explain it. It was as though something in him had broken too. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had shared his life with, was no longer the same. She was someone else now, someone capable of unimaginable cruelty. But even in the face of that, he couldn't let go. He couldn't erase the years of love, of shared memories, of laughter and joy. They were still there, buried beneath the darkness, and he wasn't ready to give them up. But it wasn't just about love. No, it was more complicated than that. Love, as he knew it, had been twisted into something unrecognizable. It had morphed into something painful, something that hurt every time he thought about it. But still, it didn't disappear. It lingered, and that was the real struggle. How could he love someone who had done something so unforgivable? How could he stand by her when the world demanded he hate her? How could he look at her and still see the woman he had married, the mother of his children, when everything had been shattered beyond repair? The pain was overwhelming. It gnawed at him, dug deep into his soul, and yet he couldn't turn it off. He couldn't just stop loving her, no matter how much he wanted to. He was trapped in his own emotions, lost in the confusion of it all. And the silence of their broken home was a constant reminder that everything had changed, that nothing would ever be the same again. But the love, his love for her, didn't disappear. It was there, buried beneath the surface, like a wound that refused to heal. And that was perhaps the most painful part of all. In the quiet moments when he was alone with his thoughts, he would think about what could have been. He would replay the memories in his mind, remembering the woman he had once known, the woman who had been so full of life, so full of love. It felt like a lifetime ago. But the truth was, he wasn't just grieving for the loss of his daughters. He was grieving for her. He was grieving for the woman who had been lost to her own mind, the woman who had slipped away into darkness and madness. And perhaps that was the true tragedy of it all. Not just what had happened, but what could have been. What could have been if she had never fallen victim to the crushing weight of her own fears and insecurities? What could have been if she had never lost herself to the madness that had consumed her? What could have been if she had never reached that breaking point, that moment when everything fell apart? The potential for happiness, for healing, was there, once upon a time. But now it was gone. The world would never understand his defense. They would never see the complexity of his emotions, the depth of the love that still lingered within him. To the world, he was just a man standing by a murderer. To them, he was just as guilty as she was. But to him, the truth was more complicated than anyone could ever know. The pain of losing his children was nothing compared to the pain of losing her. As the world turned its back on her, as the judgment piled up, he stood by her. He stood by her not to excuse her actions, but because he couldn't forget the woman she had once been. He couldn't erase the years of love, the years of memories, the years of promises. He couldn't just turn off his love, no matter how twisted it had become. The moral of this story isn't just about guilt or forgiveness. It's about understanding the depths of human emotion, the pain that comes with loving someone, even when they hurt you in ways that are impossible to comprehend. Love doesn't disappear just because a person commits an unforgivable act. It may change, twist, and break, but it doesn't vanish. And perhaps that's what makes the human heart so tragic, its capacity to love, even when it seems impossible. The husband's defense wasn't about excusing her actions. It was about recognizing the woman he once knew, the woman who had fallen victim to her own mind. In the end, the story wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about blame. It was about love, a love so powerful, so unyielding, that it could survive even the darkest of tragedies. And perhaps that's the true tragedy in itself, not just what happened, but what could have been.